So now we're going to talk about major scales and how we construct a major scale. You learned the chromatic scale and how that is simply moving up every possible note in half steps. But the primary scales that we use to actually make music are major scales and minor scales. So first of all, just to talk about major scales, the main thing to keep in mind is that traditionally in tonal music, we have scales that consist of 7 different pitches. And 8 notes to get to the octave, to the same note we started on. But 7 different notes. And it's a specific pattern of whole steps and half steps that make up a major scale. So if we look at a keyboard, this is relatively easy to see how this works, because the C major scale, if we start on C and we just play white keys, we end up with the pattern of whole steps and half steps that gives us a C major scale. And then we're back on C. Okay, so it's C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. We're back where we started. And that's the traditional do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do scale if we were to use solfege. That's how people learn how to sing those particular scales. So we would look at the sequence of half steps and whole steps that gives us that particular major scale. All right, now a half step is simply from one note to the very next available note. We call that a half step. So from C to a D flat would be a half step. If we go 2 half steps, in this case we go from C, D flat, D, this is a whole step. All right? And we're going to use numbers to represent half steps and whole steps. So I'll use a 1 to represent a half step, since we're going up 1 pitch to the next available pitch, and a 2 because we have 2 half steps to create a whole step. All right? So if we look at the pattern that we have here to create this particular major scale, we go C to D, that's a whole step, 2 half steps. Now we go D to E, another whole step. Now we go E to F, this is a half step because we're going to the next possible note. There's no black key in between here. So we go whole, half. From here we go F to G, another whole step. G to A, whole step. A to B, whole step. B to C, half step. So we have whole steps except for in 2 spots. We have a half step between E and F, and we have a half step between B and C at the end of the scale. All right? And you notice that when you're looking at the white keys on the piano, that there are 2 spots where we have half steps. And it's those 2 spots, the distance between B and C and E and F. Everywhere else, to create a half step, we have to use an accidental, a black key, so a sharp or a flat. Okay? So that's the pattern that gives us the major scale. And on the board over here, if you look at this, I've written it here. This is a C major scale, and I've written the sequence of steps that we have here. So we go from C to D as a whole step, from D to E as a whole step, E to F as a half step, whole step in the middle, from F to G, G to A, another whole step, A to B, another whole step, B to C, another half step. And the reason that I put this whole step in the middle in parentheses is because when we move on to minor scales, you're going to see that it's easiest to remember these patterns if you remember that there's always a whole step in the middle. And then we just have to remember what the outer pattern is on each side of that whole step. So in this case, the major scale, on either side of this whole step in the middle, it's symmetrical. It's 2-2-1, 2-2-1. You can remember that, then you've got the pattern. So that's how we create the major scale. Now going back to the keyboard, just to look at this, we can create major scales starting on any pitch. We don't always want to write a C major scale. We want to use other types of scales. So if I were to start on a different note, if I keep that same pattern of half steps and whole steps, I can create a different major scale. So let's look at, say, G. All right. So if I start on G, I would use this same pattern. I would go whole step, which would give me A, whole step to B, half step to C, whole step, D, whole step, E, whole step, and now this is where I have to use a black key. I have to use an F sharp to get this whole step, because otherwise I'm going to end up with a half step where I need a whole step. So I go F sharp, and then a half step at the end puts me back on G. So now I have a G major scale, which involves an F sharp, a black key, but it still sounds like a major scale. Okay, as opposed to the C major scale. It's the same pattern. And I can do that starting on any note. I can start on a black key and do the same pattern. I can start on B flat and keep that same sequence of half steps and whole steps, but it's going to involve adding more accidentals now to continue that pattern. So if I start on B flat, I'm going to end up with 2 accidentals. I need a B flat and an E flat. To create that particular pattern of scales. Okay, so that's how we construct a major scale, and what you want to remember is that particular sequence: 2 2 1, 2 in the middle, 2 2 1, and starting on any note, you can then construct a major scale.